Nabunguna po tayo sa ikalawang tagapagsalita ngayong umaga. Si Professor Roberto Tangco ay kasalukuyang kawaksing profesor ng Departamento ng Pilosopiya. Nakamit niya ang kanyang mga di-graduado at graduado degree mula sa ating pamantasan. Kasalukuyang nagtuturo sa Professor Tangco ng mga klase ng logic, social and political philosophy at research. Kabilang sa mga research interests niya ang political philosophy at epistemology, culture, and philosophy. Umaga, ibabahagi po ni Professor Tangco ang kanyang pananaliksik na pinamagatang what can we ask an outgoing president constitutionally barred from re-election?
Salamat. Ayusin ko lang muna ito. Magandang umaga sa inyo na. Before, when I was asked by to work on this, I asked her why does it have to be 6 questions for 6 years. So I did a little research, and I found out that if you added another 6 to it, you would have 666, right? So you would have 6 na taon, 6 na tanong, at 6 na sagot. And if you have some kind of biblical sense, you will know that the 666 is the number of the beast. That's the common thing. So my research gave me this. For the Catholics, right, 666 is a number that's not only of the beast, but historically it refers to Emperor Nero, who I suppose everybody knows was one of the most reviled and you might say feared emperors of the Roman Empire. He was, I think he was also what you might say perverse in many senses. All right. The other one is the Jehovah's Witness. They also have this one, and they point to 666 as something that has to do with world power. In other words, power and the coming of the kingdom. And also, it talks about the problem of imperfection. In other words, the perfect number is 7. Anybody who is 6 is less than perfect, attaining to be, maybe aspiring to be perfect, but can never be perfect. So that's why 666, you continue trying to be perfect, but you don't get to be there. The important thing here is I think the 666 has something to do with power, abuse of power, and you might say the qualities of a person like Nero or the emperor. So I think what the people who organized this conference or the seminar or this occasion wanted to say that what we have here is a warning to anyone who aspires to be the most powerful man in the country should think about certain things. And so I said, well, it's a nice idea, I'll go for it. Okay? So this is how I started it. And then I gave M an additional problem because I wanted to know, I told her I didn't have a title. And she said, well, let's just do any title. And I said, I'm going to give you come up with your own title, which was what the conference is all about. And we had, in general, long one is, what can we ask an outgoing president constitutionally barred from re-election? I was really puzzled. What should I ask such a person, right? So I figured a long title is good because long titles help make long stories short, right? So in our language, we say, sa madaling salita itong gusto ko sabihin. But if you look at it, one of the oldest, an old movie, of course, it was my time, 1969. It was a movie that had one of the longest titles of movies at that time. You can read it there. Can Hieronymus Merkin ever forget Mercy Hump and find true happiness? Came out in 1966. If you think about the title a little, you'll figure out that it's kind of, it must be some kind of weird movie. At that time, it already suggested it was risque, and it was. I was able to watch it then. All right. But if you look at it also, there are now 20 movies. I found this in the internet. I think I can bring it down. Which have long titles too. I can't get it. Okay, so what you have there is that you have those 10 titles, and they're very long. All of them, in effect, also already tell us what the movies are about. Okay, so that's how it starts. I mean, I have a long title, and I can't get rid of this. Okay, so we have the long title. The long title is, what can we ask an outgoing president constitutionally barred from re-election? So I make use of the facility of long titles. And what we have here is that it suggests these, right? It suggests to us that Philippine president is a lame duck president, somebody who can no longer, as it were, exert his power because he's not going to be in power anymore. Right? That's the notion of a lame duck. And therefore, I was thinking there's not much that would be interesting to ask him. Right? What else would you ask somebody who's outgoing? He has nothing else to say. Whatever he says will really not much have impact. If you have been observing what's been happening in our in the elections for president now, you will note that Aquino, the current president, is virtually not of any use anymore to his anointed one, Rojas. Partly, if you'll note that they're now resurrecting the problems that arose during his time, and they're now bringing it down to Rojas. So if you were Rojas, you'd probably want to distance yourself from Aquino's failures, right? And you find pundits, columnists who are saying precisely that. Okay, so now I ask, when is a president interesting? If you were a president and you still want to make your name known, or to have some impact in the political process, what would you do? Well, I looked back on it and I saw that if you look at recent presidents, by recent presidents, I'm referring to those who came in after Corazon Aquino. Right? You'll find that one, they usually say, why don't you give me another run for the election? And then a lot of press comes out and they say, well, what this guy trying to do? Does he want to be, what do you call this, another Marcos, and so on. Or you can get yourself noticed by getting indicted. We have two. We have two presidents who have been indicted for graft. One was convicted, the other one is still waiting for a term. Okay, and then you also have two who have run actually. So another way of, I think, of setting the lame duck status is to run for elective office. In other words, you'll still be in power, right? If you have the money, especially if you engage in some kind of graft, perhaps, then you'd be able to run for your own office and actually be a sponsor for others in the process. Okay? So it's a way to signal the political arena, the people also, but you're still a force. Okay? Somebody to contend. You're still somebody contending. Okay. Given this, I think we can say others would be, then you now have a group of people who would be interested in what an ex-president or an outgoing president has to say. So I figured, what would these be? These would be biographers, to be sure. Right? Of course, gossip mongers are always interested in the little stories. But then, more seriously, you would have biographers, you have fellow politicians who would be interested in whether this guy was actually a friend or a foe. Right? So when he reveals certain things, you're listening. Of course, the ombudsman would probably be interested, especially if there are possible charges that will come up against this ex-president or this outgoing president. And the people who make a lot of money will be the lawyers for good in constitutional law and, of course, in the penal code. But from Anim, I think, understandably, there will be those historians who will be very interested in what an ex-president or an outgoing president has to say. Right? Okay. And, of course, the political scientists. You want to know how this particular person figured in certain events that happened in the country during his term. But you can also say, and I would say, that there are also those who are engaged in a study or the use of political theory. Now, I make a distinction between what is political theory and what is political science work. Much of political science work, I think, is descriptive. It engages in quantitative studies on what happens in a country as far as its political processes are concerned. And political theory is something else. Okay, so here we used, let me refer you first to a version of John Plamenat's, and he defines political theory as the body of concepts that describes and prescribes. Now, this is something that we would like to avoid, I think, when we hear political science talk. When you're political science, you're not expected, to my mind, to prescribe. You're supposed to say this is what happened, and this explains this and that, but you can't tell them that he shouldn't have done that. The moment you do that, you're no longer a political scientist. You're moving into political theorizing. Not to mean that you can't do it. I'm just saying, if you want to make a distinction, and I do, you have to make a distinction between what is political science and political theory. And I'm sure you know that in academia, such distinctions are important, both for local and academic purposes. Okay? So given that Plamenat's definition, we can enlarge people who would be interested, and we could include now political philosophers or people involved in political philosophy, the political pundit, the ideologue, and the politician. These are people who I think would be interested also in what an outgoing president has to say. All right, so that being the case, I think it will be a worthwhile activity to find out, what do you ask a president? This is just a revise of the definition of political theory to make it a little bit more useful, I think. Plamenat's definition was very figurative. I think this helps us define political theory a little bit better, right? So you need to explain, and when you explicate, you go into moral values, you go into prescription. So the first one is description and the use of descriptive information or data to tell others or to inform others on how to understand that phenomenon. And then you come in and say, well, something will be better. And then you explicate your view, you enlarge your view on why you think something is better. Or you could also be judgment, you could make a judgment on what happened or what you described previously. Okay, so these are just definitions of the words used there. It will not be of much interest now. Okay, so when you go into political theory and political philosophy now, you get into, you find there's a very specialized field here, which is the study of the language and meaning of politics, or what languages and meanings arise out of the political arena, the political field. This follows the idea that if you say, for instance, justice every day, on an everyday basis, if you use it as it were on an everyday basis, then if you talk to someone who is in politics, the meanings may be different. Right? And here, well, I'll come back to this later because this topic here made me think a lot about what Professor Hernandez was saying about language and how languages die. For instance, in that example of justice, I often ask my students, what is the Filipino word for justice? And this semester, it took them 3 seconds, I think, 3 to 5 seconds to come up with a word for it. I don't know what's in your mind now, but the word they gave me was justicia. So I said, I don't think that's Filipino in the sense that that's a borrowed term. So what would be a good term for justice if it's not justicia? So we took another 5 to 10 minutes and we came up with katarungan, right? So I said, how can katarungan indicate, how does katarungan indicate justice? My understanding of katarungan is that it's made up of 3 things, right? The ka, an, and I suppose tarong. You can say, for instance, kagandahan, to talk about the quality of being ganda. Right? So, ka, ganda, and han. I'm not going to say anything more about the grammar. That's not within my field right now. Okay, so the thing is, the question now is, what does tarong mean? We know what ganda means, right? So when we say kagandahan, ang kagandahan ng ating bayan, that's fine. Pag sinabi mo, ang katarungan ay hinahanap pa rin natin, so you're saying katarungan, so my question is, what does tarong mean? And to be honest, I don't know myself. I don't know what tarong means. It's probably something, but this is something I would really like to engage the people in linguistics and Filipino department to find out. I'd really like to know what tarong means. I just haven't opened my dictionaries yet, I suppose. Okay, so going back to this, we have here specialized field. I say it's specialized because it focuses specifically on languages and meaning. Right? And the reason why I did a segue on Professor Hernandez is if we cannot really grasp, if we don't know what we mean by katarungan, then I suppose the question is, do we know what we're asking for when we say kailangan natin ng katarungan? Okay? Or dapat may katarungan sa ating bayan. So in the specialized field in political philosophy, which I'm referring to here, you would go into precisely what that means, right? The meaning of the word. And I think there is much that we can do, or the good side of this, the good side of what I just told you about the problem we had in my class. The good side is that actually you're now going to really have to think deeply about the meaning of a term, katarungan, which is usually translated as justice, which is normally taken for granted. We just say we want justice, and it seems that everybody knows what justice is. So if we try to understand, if we want to look for the meaning of katarungan, then we are adding an additional layer to our search for meaning. Right? The additional layer of what does it mean in our language, and what are the associated meanings, if you want, to the word tarong, if we really can find the word tarong. Okay, so just for information here, the analytic tradition that I'm referring to would have people like Plamenats, Stanley, Isaiah Berlin. These are the iconic persons, if you would be interested. But also, lately, we have people like Chomsky and Lakoff who are activist academicians in the sense that they are engaged in activist activities. And at the same time, they are recognized in academia for the papers that they make. Right? So that's just for information. I just want to say that this field is not sterile as some people often do say it is, although it did reach a point where it became a sterile field. Okay, so now we go. to the point here that when we talk about political theory, there is this thing called theory and practice. I think you're all familiar with that. And I'd like to introduce the preface of Immanuel Kant on this. He was writing a short piece on perpetual peace, which was among nations. But the interesting thing here is how he treated the idea or the tension, if you want, between theory and practice. So he cites this this inscription in a courtyard, right? So it says Pax Perpetua, perpetual peace. And added to this is, for the dead, it is true. They fight no more. So that's your theory, right? In a sense, that's your theory. But that tells you that, what does this suggest? This suggests that there can be no such thing as peace, as perpetual peace. Because it says, for the dead it is true, they fight no more. So for the non-dead, what is it? Is it true or is it false? Is it, do they fight no more? I think the answer, I think, is clear to everyone. When you, as long as you're, ika nga sa atin, patay, pagpantay na yung paa, doon ka na lang magiging maligaya. I don't know if you've heard of that one, but that makes some sense to me. Okay, so now, given this, Kant continues and he says, you see, there's such a thing as a practical politician. And the practical politician puts himself in a position above the theorist. The theorist here will, I suppose, be the academician for us. Because most of the time the theorist is a pedant. He just talks and talks, and it has no, if you want, it has no application. It doesn't, whatever he says does not really matter to many people. So here you have the idea that there's such a people who do theory and there are those who do practice. I think we also have a common saying here that if you can, you do. If you can't, you teach. In manner of speaking, you become a theorist. All right, so that's Kant, right? And he says something like this, and so the practical politician or the practical statement shouldn't be offended, right? He shouldn't be offended when the theorist says so many things, because by his own notion, the theorist is a pedant. There's not much that is useful in what he says. So he excuses himself. I can say whatever I want. That's nice, right? So bear that in mind, because you see, if you look back at Western political theory, it goes all the way back to, well, acknowledged to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. That's the triumvirate. And we will note that Socrates was executed, or he wasn't given a choice, but he was executed for entertaining, talking about an ideal republic or an ideal city-state. And from these discussions on this idea, a lot of things happened in Athens, and eventually he was charged with corrupting the youth. Right? So if you go back to the idea that the pedant, that the theorist is a pedant, and shouldn't be taken that seriously, then if you go back to Greece, that wasn't exactly the case. Especially if you go deeper into the life of Socrates, where he was actually very much sought after by the elite during this time. Right? So this would be during the golden age of Greece, or towards the end of the golden age of Greece. And one of his sponsors, you might say, was Pericles, and known to be one of the greater leaders of ancient Athens at that time. And also a lot of stories about Alcibiades, another controversial politician general of his time. All right, so here I think Kant was actually being ironic. He was saying that, if you think politics, there is necessarily theory in it, there is also practice in it. Okay? And so I decided we can bring it down to this. Right? I'm sorry. Well, we can say in effect that when you do political theory, I think what you must be aware of is there are theories that you can use, there are theories that you can work on, but you must also not lose track of or lose sight of what is happening. And so, to come back to the theme of our seminar, it is important to find out how an outgoing president looks at his past, what he has done, to reminisce, if you want, on the political events during his time. All right. So, let's add to this, when we talk about theory and practice, let me add, again, another Greek person, which I mentioned, Aristotle, who divided knowledge into three types. You have theoretical. Okay, so the best example for this would be mathematics. The productive side, I think these days we can think of the technology people, engineering people involved in this. And there is the practical kind of knowledge, which, to use a commentator's definition of it, is cultivating wisdom. And when you say wisdom, you're saying, eventually you have to say, is something right or is something wrong? Right? When you have wisdom, you need knowledge. You have to know how a certain thing works. And if you know how a certain thing works, you know how it can affect other people. And when you know how it can affect other people and yourself, I suppose you can now make the leap into saying, should I use this in the first place? Okay, I guess the best example is, what do you call this, a nuclear device, a nuclear bomb, where if you knew what it can do, you would take pause and ask yourself, should I use it or should I not? We know that in Hiroshima they used it, and we also know what problems arose because of it. So much so that Albert Einstein, who originally lobbied and convinced the President of the United States to use it because he knew that Germany was already at the stage of development where they could actually arm it, use it for arming. And so he convinced the American president, and they double timed on their research program, and they were able to get it ahead of the Germans, and they used it, as we all know. And after that, Albert Einstein said, I regret what I did. Okay? So, question is, was it wise on his part to have convinced the President of the United States to do so? It would be something that you would discuss, I think, in political theory work. All right. So now, let's go to what Aristotle also means by wisdom is cultivating wisdom. I think it is something that is cultivated at every turn. Aristotle was somebody who talked about living an excellent life, that is, living a virtuous life, and virtuous living, if you want, is something that happens every day. You, as it were, test yourself, or you put yourself in any situation, and when you find yourself in any situation, you end up asking yourself, should I do this or should I not? Of course, in a proper situation. You can't do it at every moment. That's just a figurative way of putting it. But the point here is you ask yourself, you do what I think we now call critical thinking. You think about what you're doing, and you look for the reasons for why you're doing it. And when you have the reasons, you take another step and you say, are these reasons good? Right? And then if you say these reasons are good, then I guess you can say, well, I can continue with what I'm doing. And if you gain the habit of doing what is good, then at a certain point, doing what is good for that particular context virtually becomes a matter of habit. And in that sense, you will be seen as, and you will also know yourself to be virtuous. Okay. So, the point here is the critical thinking component. Right? So if we do our research on political life, if you try to ask questions of an outgoing president, we should be critical, I think. And being critical helps us develop our theory. Okay. Moreover, I think that when you think about what a theorist does, and what a practical statesman does, the good ones, those who, in other words, those who do good theory and those who do good statesmanship, I'm sure that they will have that one feature, which is critical thinking. And now, if you want to merge the two, you will have what Plato called the guardian ruler, right? The person who knows and the person who knows what to do, and what is good and what is bad, of course, as far as what to do is concerned. Okay, so this is the background on the 6 questions that I would like to ask, or that I suppose can be asked. So what do we ask Aquino III? Well, let's start with the idea that what you usually have here are memoirs. It will usually fall under what we call memoirs. If you start writing it down, you put it together, you would have a memoir, you would have an autobiography. Okay? What I found is that if you look at the diaries of Ferdinand Marcos, these were diaries that were found in Malacanang when a number of journalists joined the crowd that entered Malacanang on the last day. You also read, for instance, the work of Alan Greenspan. Alan Greenspan, I'm sure you know, is the longest sitting chairman of the federal the office that acts like a central bank in the United States. All right. If you read through them, they were both self-serving, both had legacies to protect. So if you read it on its surface, it would be useless, I think. And that's where the critical thinking has to come in. Critical thinking has to come in, and you fit it within a framework of how theory and practice come together, right? So we also have to, of course, assume that in this case, the president would actually be truthful. It may be hard, but let's assume it. If you don't want to assume it, that's where critical thinking comes in. Because if he says X, then you will want to know whether X is a credible statement, and you will do a little bit research on this thing called X that he talks about, right? So if he says we were able to alleviate poverty, okay, so he gives you these figures, then I suppose you will have to look for your own figures, and you would have to try to find out, well, what do you mean by poverty? For instance, if you think about the way they redefine unemployment during the time of Gloria Macapagal, then you find that there would be some truth in what they mean when they say we have reduced unemployment during our term. Okay, but that's because of the way they define it. If you redefine it and you look at the figures, what they claim is not exactly true. Okay, so this will be useful, I think, now if you're able to package this, especially if you're in an institution like UP, which trains future leaders and government officials. You can use the information given by Aquino to package knowledge that they can use in their future work. Okay, so to me, questions are useful for research purposes, and it can also contribute to my field, which is study of political theory. So these are the 6 questions that I thought would be useful, right? So one is, do you think your term was long enough? What ideals did you promote as president? Issues and concerns, qualities of a president, and how would you characterize Philippine society? And the last one, which has something to do with kamusta ang mga boss mo. That one is a little bit local, if you want. All right, so I don't think I have that much time, so let me just give focus on the first question. So it's like, is it sufficient? The 6 years term. It's a question of term of office, actually, I think. And we are aware that there is this general claim that one term may be too short for a good president, while it is too long for a bad one. This, if I'm not mistaken, is attributed to Manuel Quezon. Okay? And if you look at it, this is the argument. Okay? If you have more than one term, you will have someone who can continue a successful program of government. For instance, if you want, again, go back to poverty. If you're a sitting president for 6 years, then is it realistic to promise that you can rid the Philippines of poverty in 6 years? Not even China was able to do it in 6 years. They did it in a little bit more than 6 years. Right? So if your promise is I'll alleviate poverty during my term, then one question is, can you really do that? So, balik yung critical thinking mo, you say, well, what is he really promising in the first place? Okay. Now, if you tweak the system, then you will have to bring in some things like what do you do with inept ones? If you decide to extend the term, what do you do with them? Right? So let's go back a little bit in terms of history. Right? So during colonial rule, we had governor generals, and they sat as long as they were, as long as they satisfied the colonial powers that put them there. Right? If ayaw na sa kanila, they go. But they stay there. There's no term of office, in other words. Okay. I told you. Okay, so, given this, let's go back to the 6 questions. That's it. Right? And the last question would be interesting because you should ask also of this person, well, sino bang boss mo in the first place? Right? Would it be the people? Is that a democratic statement? Is it the landlords who are of your kin? Or is it corporatism, if you want big corporations? Okay? And let me just sneak this in. Here is one person who is well known in Latin America. This is Jose Pepe Mujica. He is called the pauper president, right? And this is his CV. He's been there for 5 years. He died. He stepped down, but he was a former guerrilla, imprisoned, and got into power because of the Broad Front. But he donates his salary to charities. Okay, so that may be what I would call a good president. Okay, sorry, that's all I have. Thank you.
Maraming salamat po, Professor Tangco.